Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, we'll hear how Virginia home sellers might soon need to disclose more information about flood risks. A conversation between WHRO's Barry Graham and Hampton Roads delegate NADARIUS Clark about legislation aiming to increase teacher salaries. And WHRO's Ryan Murphy investigates a series of violent attacks targeting Latino students in Norfolk.
I know at least one parent that sent their son back to South America because they'd rather deal with that violence and the violence that these kids are experiencing in the most developed country in the world.
Richmond area delegate Dolores McQuinn wants to establish a state commission to study Virginia colleges that unfairly displaced black communities. McQuinn filed the legislation this week. Brandy Kellum reports from the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO.
The Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism highlighted the history shared by colleges across the state of displacing black residents while expanding campus footprints. Delegate McQuinn wants the state to study how often that's happened and whether compensation is due to former residents or their descendants.
Arming us with information, I think, would be helpful for us to sit down and decide if there is anything that we should be doing to help address the past injustices. Just as universities have been the winner in this, families have lost a lot.
The bill, which is awaiting committee assignment, would establish a 19-member panel of lawmakers, experts, and citizens. Brandy Kellum for the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO.
Virginia lawmakers are considering a bill that would make home sellers disclose a lot more about flood risk. WHRO's Catherine Hafner breaks down the issue and what it means for potential buyers.
It's currently up to potential homebuyers to do their own research on a property's risk and history of flooding. Mary Carson Stiff with the nonprofit Wetlands Watch says many people go through the entire process only to learn at the very end that their mortgage requires flood insurance.
It's been a buyer beware situation here in Virginia.
Stiff helped propose a bill at the General Assembly that would require property owners to disclose a lot more up front, including whether their home's in a flood zone. Joel Scata with the Natural Resources Defense Council says it's a growing trend among coastal states.
There's a really strong recognition that the dangers and hardships flooding can present to unsuspecting homebuyers and renters are high.
North Carolina boosted its flood disclosure laws last year. Barry Jenkins has sold real estate in Hampton Roads for 25 years. He often sees people fall in love with a home and only later learn it's at high risk of flooding. That means they have to buy flood insurance, which can be expensive.
There's just sticker shock. It's not to say that flood insurance isn't worth it, but it's already so much money that they're spending that it kind of causes a bit of a disruption.
That's why Jenkins thinks homebuyers deserve as much information about flood risk up front when making the biggest purchase of their life. But he's worried the proposed bill relies on sellers to provide that information, who might omit details or not know the full flood history.
I think it's going to give a false sense of security when the homeowner says, I don't know anything.
Jenkins would prefer buyers to get a property's history of flood insurance claims, which are handled by the federal government. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Collective bargaining may expand in Virginia. Governor Glenn Youngkin will have final say if the bill can pass the Senate and House. Virginia Public Radio's Michael Pope reports.
Athena Jones is a home health care worker in Portsmouth who says she deserves the right to collective bargaining. Back in 2020, Senator Jennifer Boysko of Herndon introduced a bill allowing collective bargaining for employees of local governments. Now she has a bill that would expand collective bargaining to other public sector employees. If her bill is approved by Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin will have the final say about whether more people will be able to engage in collective bargaining in Virginia. Reporting from the Capitol in Richmond, I'm Michael Pope.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Virginia continues to face a significant teacher shortage as vacancies doubled between 2019 and 2023. Legislation to raise teacher salaries in Virginia to the national average has garnered bipartisan support in the General Assembly. Hampton Roads delegate NADARIUS Clark is a chief sponsor of the bill. WHRO's Barry Graham caught up with Clark to discuss the legislation.
You have said that this is something the General Assembly has heard from all across the Commonwealth. Is there a real sense of urgency? Has an alarm been sounded about teacher salaries in Virginia?
Yes, this is something that I actually have been pushing for 3 years now. This year, it passed subcommittee on a bipartisan basis. It passed full committee on a bipartisan basis, and now it's headed to the appropriations subcommittee for education K-12. So I do think that, this is something that everyone is finally, willing to work together around to make sure we're delivering. Because it's the 3% raise that the governor offered, it doesn't even keep up with inflation. And we have to make sure that we're just not, putting a drop in the bucket, but we're delivering for our teachers.
Has there been any pushback so far by school divisions fearful that they would not be able to meet the financial demand that this is going to stipulate?
I know there is some rumors out there saying that certain places won't be able to afford it. And that's why we're working out in the budget to make sure that every locality will have the funds that it needs from the state to make sure that they are paying their teachers what they deserve.
This is a rare piece of legislation that has bipartisan support inside the General Assembly. Is there any reason you think why both sides can come to an agreement on this issue?
Yeah, I think we will come to an agreement. Senator Lucas has carried it on the Senate side and already passed. So both chambers is showing that this is a priority. Both sides are working together to deliver this and make sure that it makes it to the governor's desk. As far as the legislature and the General Assembly, we're working in a bipartisan manner to make sure that we deliver this to his desk and that it's ready to go. But that this bill is ready to be signed into law once it makes it to his desk.
There seems to be some concern on how to define the national average of teacher salaries, thus establishing the baseline for the amount to be paid. Is this going to be difficult, do you think, to arrive at consensus on what exactly the national average is?
We have been using the National Education Association's formula for the national average, and it shows right now that Virginia is about $5,000 short of the national average. So that is the gap that we will be working in the field of, around that $5,000 gap.
Is there any concern that the state may not be able to afford this?
I haven't heard that from the appropriator chair in the Senate or in the House that funding is a issue to deliver this. I don't believe that will be a problem. I think we will get this to the governor's desk, and then it will be his decision on what the fate will be.
Delegate Clark, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to talk with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and you have a great weekend.
More than 1.3 million people rode the rails in Virginia last year, the highest ridership numbers since the state-supported service began in 2009, according to the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. What's behind the increase and what were the local numbers? I spoke with the authority's Karina Romero. Karina, the passenger numbers keep going up and service keeps increasing, and all of this is good news, right?
Business is booming. People are taking the train. Our calendar year ridership, we had more than 1.3 million passengers last calendar year, and that was at almost 30% from calendar year 2022.
How much of the increase comes from new service and how much from service that was restored that was previously cut during the pandemic?
When we look at calendar year 2023, that includes all 8 of our daily round trips. When you look at 2022, half of the year we only had 5 daily round trips because we launched Roanoke, the second round trip there, and of course the third one to Norfolk. And then we resumed service to Newport News. There was one round trip that had been canceled due to the pandemic, and we brought that back the second half of 2022.
So if we zoom into Hampton Roads, there were big increases for both Newport News and Norfolk?
That's correct. Newport News saw an increase of 36.8% compared to 2022, and Norfolk was up 30.8%. Newport News, 363,000 passengers. Great number. And Norfolk even topped that at 490,000. So lots of people are taking the train.
You guys do your research and slice and dice the numbers all the time. What do you hear about the reasons for more people choosing Amtrak?
Traffic. The people are tired of sitting in their cars. They're looking for an alternative. And when we run the trains at really great times and they go where we want to go, then the passengers get on board.
Karina Romero from the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, thanks so much. There were also double-digit increases for the other major cities served by Amtrak in Virginia, Richmond and Roanoke. The Port of Virginia has announced a new change. It is exclusively using clean energy. WHRO's Catherine Hafner has the details.
The port is working to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2040. That means not only powering the port with renewables, but also shutting off emissions from things like diesel trucks. This year's milestone marks the first half of that. Here's Kathy Vick with the Port of Virginia.
We were able, January 1, to achieve 100% of our electricity to come from clean sources. So that's nuclear, wind, solar, and some hydro.
They've done that through a utility agreement that ensures their power comes from those sources. Vic says going green is a smart business decision. The port can help cargo owners meet their own emissions reduction requirements.
As these cargo owners are choosing where to send their cargo, we feel like it gives us definitely a commercial competitive advantage.
The Norfolk port is the first on the East Coast to fully run on renewables. Now they'll focus on electrifying equipment like forklifts and yard tractors. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
We should mention WHRO's Vice President of News, Maurice Jones, is a member of the Port of Virginia's Board of Directors. Joan is not involved with editorial decisions related to coverage of the port. The Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is about to undergo some major renovations. WUNC's Bradley George reports the project will take about a year and a half.
Scaffolding will soon cover the 210-foot lighthouse. A Massachusetts-based company will repair and restore every part of the 150-year-old structure. A new Fresnel lens will be fabricated for the beacon. Window ornaments and ironwork will also be restored. The National Park Service says visitors will enjoy better access to the lighthouse with wider walkways and more historical interpretation features. The project is estimated to cost $19 million. It comes 25 years after the lighthouse was moved a half-mile inland to keep it from falling into the sea. I'm Bradley George.
Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears is backing a pair of conservative school choice bills, but her support is not expected to be enough to overcome Democrats' opposition. Brad Kuttner has more from Richmond.
We're talking about our future, and we're not going to stand in the way of a parent who wants better for their child.
A longtime charter school advocate, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears spoke Wednesday before a crowd of students from a collection of private schools who lobbied legislators in the hopes of new funding from the state. Spotsylvania County Delegate Philip Scott is carrying a pair of bills that would offer that funding. The first involves creating a tax credit for homeschooling or sending a child to a private school, though it's limited to families that make under 200% of the poverty line. The second, called the Education Excellence for All program, would allow parents currently making under 300% the poverty line to access funds currently allotted by the state to their student. Instead of the money going towards their expected public school, it could go towards a private program or support the purchase of homeschooling equipment. Scott hadn't yet gotten an economic impact statement on either effort, but he said some state money that currently goes to the locality would still end up there, minimizing its impact.
It empowers parents to make decisions that best suit their children's educational journey.
But passage in the Democratic-controlled chambers is unlikely. When asked about Scott's criticism of the current quality of state schools, Roanoke area delegate and House Education Committee Chair Sam Rasool said many of those issues stem from a history of underfunding.
All the more reason why we need to make those critical investments in those public schools.
Rasool and his Democratic colleagues have instead promised to increase teacher pay, among other initiatives they say will aid in the state's public school system. In Richmond, I'm Brad Kuttner.
Portsmouth's Rivers Casino turned 1 year old this week. Roy Corby is the casino's general manager. He tells our media partners at WTKR that there have been some growing pains.
Anytime you open a completely new industry in an area, you're always going to face some challenges, right? Trying to train a whole team of people who had never stepped foot into a casino. Well, the team has adapted quickly and really adjusted well.
One of those, a $275,000 settlement with the Virginia Lottery for underage gambling and other violations. Corby says the casino met its goal of hiring 30% of its staff from Portsmouth.
We were going to try to recruit and promote from here. And to be able to follow through on that is tremendous.
One big benefit to the city is a steady share of the tax on the games, averaging about $1.25 million a month or about $15 million a year, plus meals tax. Families in Norfolk say their children are being robbed, attacked, and targeted at school by other students, specifically because they are Latino. Some students have left school altogether. Others attempt to learn in spite of potential harm. WHRO's Ryan Murphy reported their stories.
Martín Martinez Batista says he was walking to soccer practice when, out of nowhere, he was surrounded by middle school students. He knew they were going to hurt him. The kids hit him for several minutes. Martín was left bleeding from the ears. The laptop he'd used to shield his head was destroyed.
Me estaban diciendo que me estaban pegando porque yo era hispano.
Martín, who came from Honduras 2.5 years ago, says the only thing his attackers said was that they were beating him because he's Hispanic. His story is one of several WHRO heard from families concerned about assaults and robberies of Latino students, particularly immigrants. Patricia Bracknell is the head of the Chamber for Hispanic Progress. Many Latino families have come to her about what their children face at school.
And they're coming from countries where they're running away from violence. And I know at least one parent that sent their son back to South America because they'd rather deal with that violence than the violence that these kids are experiencing in the most developed country in the world.
Some families who have talked to Bracknell are afraid to go to the police or schools because of their citizenship status. For some that did go to the authorities, their concerns were misinterpreted or ignored. Norfolk Public Schools declined multiple requests for interviews about the assaults. The escalation of these attacks mirrors a nationwide rise in crimes against Latinos since 2019. Researchers say bigoted rhetoric from politicians and conspiracy theories have fueled racial violence aimed at the Latino community. Stepbrothers Derek Santos Rodriguez and Leo Medina were attacked by another group of kids outside Norview High in December. Video of the incident shows a teenager holding Derek down and punching him, while 3 others kick Derek in the head. Eventually, security guards come to break the fight up. Derek and Leo were bruised and cut. Derek spent the night in the hospital and suffered a broken finger. The 2 Latino boys were suspended for fighting and missed a month of school. When Derek returned to school, 3 students showed up at his classroom looking for him. He doesn't know why. His teacher chased them off before they got to him, but he felt unsafe enough to ask his mother, Teresa Rodriguez, to pick him up. It was only 30 minutes into the school day.
Yo como madre me dolió. Si vio el video, le pegan patadas. No sé cuántos, unos 5, 6 adolescentes. Al golpearle su cabeza, le tiraban patadas, golpes, puños. Le hubieran dado un mal golpe, ¿qué hubiera pasado con mi hijo?
Rodriguez says it's hard for her to forget seeing the video of her son getting beat up. She doesn't like letting Derek and Leo out of the house alone anymore.
¿Cómo puedo estar tranquila cuando uno quiere un mejor futuro, que sus hijos estudien? Hace todo lo posible para que ellos estén ahí. Otras madres a la edad de mi hijo ya no los tienen en la escuela. Los mandan a trabajar, nosotros no. Hacemos todo lo posible, trabajamos para que ellos estudien. Pero, ¿cómo estar tranquilos con lo que pasó?
She wonders how she can be comfortable sending her kids to school when this is happening. She knows families that have sent their kids to work instead. Rodriguez doesn't want that for her boys. She wants them to get an education, but that relies on getting them through school safely. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
And we should mention Norfolk Public Schools are members of HRETA, which holds the broadcast license for the WHRO stations. WHRO's Barry Graham sat down with Ryan Murphy to discuss his reporting process for this story.
Ryan, how much of an issue do you think this is across the city and inside the school system?
So based on the folks that we talked to, it's obviously the issues are concentrated at Norview High, where the density of the Latino population is in the city. The folks that we talked to said that it's not just happening at Norview, that there are issues in other schools. Obviously, the cases we highlighted were happening at Norview High.
Give me a sense of what's actually happening here. Is this happening after school, during the school hours, off campus, just off campus, while kids are leaving athletic events, cafeteria? What is there a pattern?
A lot of it's happening at school. It's happening in the schools and in the hallways, in the bathrooms. It's happening right after school, outside, on the field outside or on the sidewalk just outside the school.
What does the school system provide to students like this, students who are English as a second language and students who are immigrants and come into the area?
So there are programs designed for kids who don't primarily speak English, but from what we were hearing, especially from the parents, the schools don't seem to be fully equipped to handle the kids who don't speak full English, the families who show up to the office to try to get information or see what's happened with their kid, and they're met with staffs full of folks who don't speak Spanish and they don't speak English. There are absolutely resources in place, but from what we're hearing, there's not enough resources.
What's the next step in this entire process? I think the alarm has been sounded.
Well, I mean, obviously the families want something done. They want things put in place at the schools to better deal with these incidents when they happen, to hold the students accountable who are perpetrating the violence, to prevent the violence happening in the first place. Unfortunately, because we weren't able to talk to schools administrators, principals, we don't really have a good grasp of what they are doing, what they have done, or what they want to be doing next to address this issue.
Did you have any trouble getting the story?
So, I mean, it was definitely a challenge for me as a reporter who does not speak Spanish to be interviewing these families who speak very little English, or most of the members speak very little English. When I was setting up these interviews, I had a source that was willing to sit as a translator for me for these families, and that allowed me to sort of get the story as it was told to me through the translator, and just at least get to sit down with these folks, let them tell their whole story. Once I did that and was sort of trying to piece the story together, our editor, Michelle Hankerson, who does speak Spanish, was able to come in and help me verify the translations, get them accurate to, what was actually said versus the sort of understanding of what was said, a literal translation versus a sort of non-literal translation.
And I'm curious to know that when you were in these conversations with the parents, did the concern, did the passion for their children, could you pick up on it even though there was this language barrier?
Oh, absolutely. And, as I'm looking in the eyes of a mother who is frantically telling me in her language what's happened to her son, how she can't bear seeing it anymore, how she had to watch the video of him being beaten, and how she hates the idea of sending him back out into the world for that to happen again. I didn't know the words she was saying, but I knew what she was saying to me. She was getting emotional. I mean, there's universal sort of emotions that come across regardless of the language barrier. Absolutely.
Looking forward to hearing from the rest of the story. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Barry.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from Catherine Hafner, Barry Graham and Ryan Murphy, Brandy Callum with VCIJ, VPR's Michael Pope and Brad Kuttner, WUNC's Bradley George, also Connor Worley, who produced today's show. A reminder that you can always get a news update at WHRV.org, the WHRO smartphone app, online on Facebook, or at X, formerly known as Twitter. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton.